The duel on Mustafar between Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi was a critical moment in the Star Wars saga, defining the fates of the two Jedi and the galaxy itself. In the canonical timeline, Obi-Wan's survival allowed him to train Luke Skywalker, which ultimately led to the redemption of Anakin and the defeat of Emperor Palpatine. However, what if Anakin had succeeded in killing Obi-Wan? Such an outcome would have profound consequences for the galaxy and Darth Sidious's plans for his apprentice. This scenario would solidify Anakin's transformation into Darth Vader and reinforce Sidious's confidence in him as the true successor to the Sith legacy. If Anakin killed Obi-Wan on Mustafar, it would mark his final severance from his Jedi past. Obi-Wan represented the last anchor to his life as a Jedi Knight and a moral guidepost amid Anakin's descent into the dark side. By taking Obi-Wan's life, Anakin would obliterate any lingering ties to the ideals of the Jedi Order and solidify his allegiance to the Sith. In Sidious's eyes, this would confirm Vader as a true Sith Lord, embodying the ruthlessness and determination necessary to carry the Sith mantle. Sidious's vision of the rule of two emphasized power above all else, and Vader, unburdened by the constraints of compassion or loyalty to others, would perfectly fit this model. The aftermath of such an event would be crucial. Without Obi-Wan, Padme Amidala's fate would likely remain unchanged. Whether or not Anakin's anger led him to strike her down in a fit of rage, as he nearly did, her despair over his fall to the dark side might still lead to her death. If Padme survived the encounter, she would become a symbol of Anakin's former life, potentially complicating his path forward. However, if Padme perished, as she did in the canonical timeline, this would fuel Anakin's rage and further bind him to Sidious. From Sidious's perspective, Vader's willingness to kill his former master would prove his loyalty and strength. Sidious valued power and submission to the Sith philosophy above all else. He viewed his apprentices as tools to achieve his goals, ultimately expecting them to surpass him, as the rule of two dictates. By defeating and killing Obi-Wan, Vader would demonstrate that he had embraced the dark side fully, making him a worthy successor. Sidious would see this act as an indication that Vader could fulfill his role as the enforcer of the Sith's will and the Empire's power. The Empire under Vader would likely emerge stronger in the short term. Without Obi-Wan, there would be no one to protect or guide Luke and Leia during their formative years, leaving the galaxy without its eventual saviors. This would give Vader and Sidious free rein to consolidate their rule. The Jedi, already decimated by Order 66, would have no figure to rally around, allowing the Sith to stamp out any remaining resistance with relative ease. Vader's loyalty to Sidious, however, would not be absolute, even in this altered scenario. While killing Obi-Wan might strengthen his bond to the dark side, Vader's inner conflict would persist. His descent into the dark side was driven largely by his desire to save Padme, and her loss would leave a void that Sidious could not fully fill. Over time, Vader's resentment toward Sidious would grow, as it did in the canonical timeline. However, without the influence of Obi-Wan or the hope represented by Luke, Vader might lack the motivation to rise against his master, leaving the Sith in control indefinitely. The galaxy would experience the full force of an empire led by Sidious and Vader without the hope of rebellion that Luke's heroism inspired. With Obi-Wan's death and the Jedi wiped out, the Sith's grip on the galaxy would tighten. Sidious would likely continue his search for ways to achieve immortality, using Vader as an enforcer rather than a potential rival. Vader, driven by anger and despair, would carry out his master's will, crushing opposition with brutal efficiency. The question of whether Sidious would still consider Vader a true successor hinges on the Sith ideology itself. Sidious's ultimate goal was to create an apprentice strong enough to eventually overthrow him, in accordance with the rule of two. Vader's triumph over Obi-Wan would convince Sidious that his apprentice possessed the strength and determination to fulfill this role. While Sidious might continue to manipulate and control Vader, he would view him as a legitimate successor to the Sith lineage, especially if Vader showed the capacity for independent action and ambition. In this timeline, the absence of Obi-Wan would also impact the rebellion. Without the Jedi's influence, figures like Bail Organa and Mon Mothma might struggle to inspire widespread resistance against the Empire. The lack of Luke and Leia's leadership would leave the rebellion fragmented and vulnerable, making it unlikely to achieve the victories that ultimately led to the Empire's downfall. This would allow the Sith to dominate the galaxy unchallenged for generations. Sidious's confidence in Vader would likely manifest in his willingness to entrust his apprentice with greater responsibilities. Over time, Sidious might even see Vader as an equal rather than a subordinate, a relationship that would deviate slightly from the Sith tradition but align with Sidious's pragmatic approach to power. Vader, hardened by the loss of Obi-Wan and Padme, would become a more efficient and focused enforcer, solidifying the Sith's legacy. Despite this, the inherent instability of the Sith Order would remain a potential weakness. The rule of two, while effective in fostering ambition and strength, also ensured that the Sith were constantly at risk of internal conflict. Vader's suppressed resentment towards Sidious could lead to an eventual confrontation, especially if Vader discovered a new source of hope or strength. However, without Obi-Wan's guidance or Luke's influence, the likelihood of Vader challenging Sidious successfully would diminish. The Sith might maintain their dominance, but the cycle of betrayal inherent to their philosophy would continue to pose a threat to their long-term stability. If Anakin had killed Obi-Wan, the galaxy's trajectory would shift dramatically. Sidious would see Vader as his true successor, a powerful Sith Lord capable of carrying out his vision for the Empire. The absence of the Jedi's influence would leave the galaxy at the mercy of the Sith, allowing them to consolidate their power and crush any resistance. However, the Sith's internal contradictions and Vader's unresolved inner turmoil would ensure that their dominance, while lasting, would not be entirely secure. This altered timeline would underscore the complexities of power, loyalty, and ambition within the Sith Order. With Obi-Wan dead and Vader solidified as Sidious's enforcer, the galaxy would enter a period of unchallenged Sith dominance. The dynamic between Vader and Sidious would evolve in ways that reflect the complexities of their relationship. While Sidious would regard Vader as a true successor, the power struggles inherent in the Sith ideology would remain a potential source of tension. Sidious, as the reigning Dark Lord, would expect unyielding loyalty from his apprentice, while simultaneously anticipating that Vader would one day challenge him. This paradox would define their alliance, shaping the future of the Sith Empire. Sidious's faith in Vader as his successor would be rooted in the Sith philosophy of power through conflict. By killing Obi-Wan, Vader would have demonstrated the ruthless efficiency and detachment that the Sith prized. Sidious would likely see this act as confirmation that Vader had shed his Jedi weakness and fully embraced the dark side. With no Jedi to temper his actions, Vader's rise would represent the culmination of Sidious's grand design to eliminate the Old Order and establish the Sith as the galaxy's ruling power. The absence of Obi-Wan and the lack of a surviving Jedi mentor would leave Vader without any moral counterbalance. This would allow Sidious to mold Vader into a figure of terror and unquestionable authority. Vader's connection to the Force and his combat prowess would make him a formidable instrument of the Sith's will, ensuring that any dissent was swiftly and decisively crushed. Sidious, ever the schemer, would exploit Vader's rage and grief to maintain control, using manipulation to keep his apprentice in line. Yet even as he relied on Vader's power, Sidious would continue to seek opportunities to prolong his own life and ensure his supremacy. Vader, however, would not be immune to the internal conflicts that characterized his fall to the dark side. Despite his commitment to the Sith, the emotional scars left by Padme's death and the betrayal of his former comrades would continue to haunt him. These unresolved emotions could manifest as simmering resentment towards Sidious, who had orchestrated the events that led to his suffering. Although Vader's loyalty to the Sith would remain outwardly unshaken, the potential for rebellion would linger beneath the surface, a testament to the complexities of his character. Without Obi-Wan, the galaxy's resistance to the Empire would face significant challenges. The rebellion would lack the guidance and inspiration that figures like Luke and Leia provided in the original timeline. Instead, scattered groups of insurgents might attempt to resist Imperial rule, but their efforts would likely be fragmented and ineffective. Sidious and Vader would use the full might of the Empire to suppress these uprisings, ensuring that opposition was swiftly quashed. One of the most significant implications of this scenario would be the long-term stability of the Sith Empire. While Vader's loyalty to Sidious might waver over time, The lack of external threats to their rule would allow the Sith to focus on consolidating their power. Sidious, always paranoid about betrayal, might seek to create additional safeguards against Vader's potential defiance. This could include the development of secret apprentices, as seen with characters like Starkiller in alternate storylines, or experiments with cloning and immortality to ensure Sidious's dominance. The Rule of Two, which defined the Sith structure, would remain a point of tension in this alternate timeline. By its nature, the Rule of Two encouraged competition and betrayal, with the apprentice expected to eventually overthrow the master. Vader's growing power and ambition would inevitably clash with Sidious's need to maintain control, setting the stage for a possible confrontation. However, without the redemptive influence of Luke or the hope of reclaiming his humanity, Vader's motivations might remain rooted in anger and despair, making his rebellion against Sidious less about justice and more about personal power. Another critical factor in this timeline would be the fate of Luke and Leia. Without Obi-Wan to protect them or guide their development, the twins might grow up unaware of their heritage. Sidious and Vader, knowing the potential threat posed by the offspring of Anakin Skywalker, would likely make finding and eliminating them a priority. If the twins were discovered and captured, Sidious might see them as potential assets, attempting to corrupt them to the dark side and use them as tools to further the Sith's agenda. Alternatively, Vader's knowledge of their existence could spark an internal conflict, forcing him to confront the remnants of his former identity as Anakin Skywalker. Sidious's view of Vader as a true successor would not preclude him from considering contingencies. The Sith's emphasis on power meant that Sidious would always be on the lookout for a stronger apprentice or a way to bypass the limitations of mortality. However, Vader's demonstrated strength and willingness to embrace the dark side would make him an ideal enforcer in the short term. Sidious's trust in Vader as a successor would be tempered by his awareness of the inevitability of Sith betrayal, ensuring that their relationship remained one of mutual suspicion. In the long term, the galaxy under Sith rule would likely descend into a state of fear and oppression. With no Jedi to challenge their authority, the Sith would continue to exploit the galaxy's resources and subjugate its inhabitants. The lack of a unifying force for the rebellion would ensure that resistance remained disorganized and ineffective. Over time, the Sith's rule could lead to widespread despair, further entrenching their dominance but also creating the conditions for eventual unrest. If Anakin had killed Obi-Wan, the Star Wars saga would take a dramatically darker turn. Sidious would view Vader as the embodiment of Sith ideals, a worthy successor capable of carrying on the Sith legacy. The absence of the Jedi would leave the galaxy at the mercy of the Sith, ensuring their dominance for generations. Yet the inherent instability of the Sith Order and Vader's unresolved inner conflicts would remain potential vulnerabilities, highlighting the fragile nature of power built on fear and betrayal. This alternate timeline would underscore the enduring impact of individual choices on the galaxy's destiny, illustrating the profound consequences of a single pivotal moment.